The first time Mara Ellis saw them, she thought she was imagining things. The shadows seemed to flicker at the edge of her vision, dark, twisted forms that vanished when she looked directly at them. It was a cold, rainy evening, and the heavy downpour outside only seemed to intensify the darkness within the old Victorian mansion she had recently inherited. The grand house loomed over her, a relic from a bygone era, its intricate wooden panels and ornate wallpaper now peeling with age. Mara, a historian with a keen eye for details, was attempting to organize her great-uncle's extensive library. She worked late into the night, her only companions the steady rhythm of the rain and the occasional creak of the house settling. But as the clock struck midnight, Mara's attention was drawn to a peculiar sound, a whispering, like the rustling of dead leaves, coming from the shadows just beyond the light's reach. Her heartbeat quickened as she turned, her flashlight cutting through the darkness like a blade. The whispers stopped abruptly, replaced by an eerie silence that seemed to echo with anticipation. She shook her head, dismissing it as fatigue-induced hallucinations. Yet, deep down, she felt a gnawing unease she couldn't quite shake. The following nights brought no relief. The shadows grew bolder, their dark forms emerging from the corners of rooms and watching her with hollow, unsettling eyes. Mara tried to brush it off as her imagination, fueled by the isolation of the mansion and her intense workload. But the feeling of being watched persisted, growing stronger with each passing night. One evening, while exploring the attic, a place she had yet to fully investigate, Mara stumbled upon an old, dust-covered chest. Inside, she found a collection of journals, their leather bindings cracked and faded with age. As she flipped through the pages, she discovered they belonged to her great-great-grandmother, Eleanor Ellis. The entries were filled with strange accounts of shadowy figures and unexplained noises, along with desperate pleas for help. One entry stood out, scrawled in frantic handwriting. "The shadows grow restless. They follow us, whispering of an ancient curse. We are bound to them until it is broken. Beware, for they hunger for souls." Mara's curiosity was piqued. Could these accounts be linked to the disturbances she was experiencing? Determined to uncover the truth, she delved deeper into her family's history. Her research revealed a chilling tale of an ancestor cursed by a malevolent witch named Morgana Blackwood, whose wrath had bound the souls of the dead to the Ellis family home. As Mara continued her investigation, the shadowy figures grew more aggressive. They would appear in her peripheral vision, moving closer, their eyes glowing with a spectral light. She would find objects in her home displaced, moved as if by invisible hands. Sleep eluded her, and her once orderly life began to crumble under the strain of constant fear. One night, as Mara sat in her study, trying to make sense of the curse, she noticed a shadow moving across the wall. It was larger, darker, and more defined than the others. With trembling hands, she grabbed her flashlight and approached it, her breath hitching as she saw the shadow take on a more distinct, humanoid shape. The figure seemed to be reaching out to her, its hollow eyes pleading or perhaps threatening. In her frantic research, Mara discovered an old journal belonging to a local historian who had investigated the curse years ago. The historian's notes revealed that Morgana Blackwood was a witch wronged by the Ellis family centuries ago. Driven by vengeance, she had cursed the family, binding the souls of the dead to the mansion, their shadows lingering and growing stronger over time. The curse was fueled by the malevolent energy of the restless souls, and it could only be broken by confronting Morgana's spirit and releasing the souls bound to the house. Desperate for answers, Mara sought out the few remaining residents of Willow's End who might have knowledge of the curse. She spoke to an elderly woman, Agnes Blackwood, who claimed to be a descendant of Morgana's victims. Agnes revealed that Morgana had been buried in a secret, unmarked grave in the nearby woods, her resting place marked by a twisted tree. The key to breaking the curse, Agnes said, lay in confronting Morgana and performing a ritual to release the trapped souls. With newfound determination, Mara ventured into the dark forest surrounding her home. The twisted trees loomed ominously, their branches reaching out like skeletal fingers. The night was eerily silent, save for the distant howl of a wolf and the crunch of leaves beneath her feet. Guided by Agnes's description, Mara found the twisted tree marking Morgana's grave. She dug through the earth, her hands growing numb from the cold and the weight of her task. As the grave was unearthed, a chilling wind swept through the forest, and the shadowy figures that had tormented Mara began to close in. The shadows seemed to writhe and twist, their forms becoming more defined, their eyes glowing with an eerie light. Mara's heart pounded as she unearthed a tattered book bound in ancient leather, buried alongside Morgana's remains. Desperate, Mara opened the book and followed the ritual instructions. She recited the ancient incantation, her voice trembling but resolute. As she chanted, the shadows around her began to convulse, their forms flickering and distorting. The air grew thick with an oppressive force, and the temperature dropped sharply. Just as the shadows seemed to close in, a blinding light erupted from the book. The figures recoiled, their hollow eyes widening in terror. The light intensified, enveloping the shadows and forcing them back. The oppressive presence of Morgana's spirit manifested, a dark, twisted apparition with glowing eyes filled with rage and despair. Mara continued the ritual, her voice growing stronger with each chant. The light grew brighter, and the shadows began to dissolve, their forms dissipating into wisps of smoke. Morgana's apparition let out a final anguished cry before vanishing into the ether. The oppressive darkness lifted, and the forest seemed to sigh in relief. Exhausted but relieved, Mara returned to her home. The mansion felt different, lighter, as if the oppressive weight of the curse had been lifted. The shadowy figures were gone, and a sense of calm had settled over the house. Mara knew that her family's dark history had been confronted and resolved, but the experience had left an indelible mark on her. The mansion, once a place of terror, now stood as a testament to the strength and resilience of those who face their fears head-on. As Mara looked out over the now tranquil woods, she felt a profound sense of closure. The shadows had been vanquished, and the curse had been broken. Willow's End was no longer a place of haunting nightmares, but a quiet, peaceful town where Mara could finally start anew, free from the shadowy specters of the past. Lena Carrington had always envisioned a tranquil life in the countryside, far from the ceaseless noise and stress of city life. When she found the old manor on the edge of Ravenmoor, it seemed like the perfect escape. The house, though aged and slightly decrepit, promised peace and solitude. She reveled in the thought of restoring its charm and immersing herself in the simplicity of rural living. The first few nights were calm, but as the days turned to weeks, Lena began to notice subtle disturbances. At first, it was a faint rustling in the dark corners of the manor, a feeling of being watched. She dismissed these as remnants of the city's stress creeping into her new life. But then, the shadows began to move on their own. One night, Lena awoke to find her room suffused with an unsettling darkness. The shadows on the walls seemed to shift and elongate, taking on eerie, almost human-like shapes. She blinked, and the figures disappeared, but the sense of dread lingered. She told herself it was just her imagination, a trick of the mind. However, the occurrences grew more frequent and disturbing. Lena would hear whispers in the dead of night, see fleeting glimpses of shadowy figures, and find objects inexplicably moved. Her initial curiosity turned to fear as the shadows seemed to follow her every move. Desperate for answers, Lena began exploring the history of Ravenmoor, hoping to uncover a rational explanation. Lena's research led her to the village's library, a quaint, dusty building filled with old records and faded newspapers. The librarian, a reclusive elderly woman named Mrs. Hargrove, seemed hesitant to speak about the village's past, but eventually revealed a troubling legend. According to local law, Ravenmoor had been struck by a devastating plague centuries ago. The villagers had succumbed to the disease, and their bodies were said to have risen as shadowy figures, doomed to wander the village eternally. The more Lena delved into the village's history, the more she discovered about Eliza Ravenwood, a healer who had been blamed for the plague. Eliza was rumored to have been cursed by the villagers, her spirit bound to the shadows of the deceased. The curse was said to have turned the dead into malevolent, shadowy beings, perpetuating their suffering and ensuring the village's torment. Lena's investigations revealed that the curse was a result of fear and superstition, with Eliza's spirit now seeking vengeance against those who wronged her. The shadowy zombies were not merely restless spirits, but manifestations of the plague victims bound to Eliza's will. As Lena pieced together the legend, the shadows around her grew more aggressive. They would press closer, their hollow eyes glowing with a sinister light. The feeling of being watched became almost unbearable. Lena's once peaceful home was now a place of dread, and the village's quiet facade seemed to mask a much darker reality. Determined to end the nightmare, Lena sought the help of Mrs. Hargrove, who reluctantly revealed the location of Eliza's final resting place. According to the librarian, Eliza had been buried in an unmarked grave at the edge of the village, hidden beneath a gnarled, ancient oak tree. One foggy evening, Lena ventured into the forest, guided by the librarian's instructions. The trees loomed like skeletal sentinels, their twisted branches casting long, menacing shadows. Lena found the oak tree, its gnarled roots intertwining with the earth. She began to dig, her hands shaking with both fear and determination. As Lena unearthed the grave, the oppressive atmosphere grew heavier. The shadowy figures emerged from the darkness, their forms coalescing into more defined shapes. They seemed to encircle her, their eyes glowing with malevolent intent. Lena's heart raced as she continued to dig, uncovering a weathered wooden box alongside Eliza's skeletal remains. Inside the box, Lena found an old tome bound in leather, its pages yellowed with age. The book contained rituals and incantations intended to break the curse. Lena's hands trembled as she recited the ancient words, her voice echoing through the forest. The shadows writhed and twisted, their forms distorting and flickering. A cold wind swept through, and the temperature dropped sharply. Eliza's spirit materialized, a dark, anguished figure with hollow eyes and a face twisted in rage. The spirit let out a chilling wail, the sound reverberating through the forest. Lena continued the incantation, her voice growing stronger with each verse. The light from the book grew brighter, casting a harsh glare that pushed back the shadows. The shadows writhed in agony as the light intensified. Eliza's spirit let out a final, sorrowful cry before dissolving into the mist. The oppressive darkness lifted, and the forest seemed to sigh in relief. Lena's heart pounded as the last of the shadowy figures vanished, their malevolent presence dissipating into the night. Exhausted but relieved, Lena returned to Ravenmoor. The village felt different, lighter, as if the curse had been lifted. The once sinister shadows were gone, and the village seemed to emerge from its long nightmare. Lena's new home, once a place of dread, now stood as a testament to the power of confronting one's fears and the strength to overcome the darkness of the past. As she looked out over the now peaceful village, Lena felt a deep sense of closure. Ravenmoor had been freed from its torment, and she had found not only peace, but a renewed sense of purpose. The echoes of the past had been silenced, and the village could finally rest. Jack Thompson stared at the grand yet weathered farmhouse that now stood before him. The house, inherited from a distant relative he had never met, was both imposing and inviting in its solitude. The sprawling estate was surrounded by dense woods and mist-covered hills, offering the escape he had yearned for. He hoped the isolation would provide the perfect backdrop for his artistic pursuits and allow him to start anew. The first few days were filled with the excitement of setting up his new home. Jack unpacked boxes, arranged his art supplies, and explored the expansive grounds. Despite the house's dilapidated condition, he was optimistic. The creaky floorboards and dust-covered furniture only added to the character of his new abode. However, as the days turned into nights, Jack began to notice strange occurrences. It started with the feeling of being watched, a cold shiver that would run down his spine whenever he entered a darkened room. Then came the shadows, dark, flickering shapes that seemed to move on their own. Jack dismissed these as tricks of the light or the product of his overactive imagination. Yet, the disturbances grew more unsettling. Late one night, Jack awoke to a chilling sight. Shadowy figures, barely discernible against the darkness, moved silently through the hallways. They had no distinct features, only a vague, menacing presence. Jack's heart raced as he tried to convince himself it was a figment of his imagination. But the figures seemed to watch him, their movements deliberate and unnervingly quiet. Determined to uncover the source of the disturbances, Jack began investigating the history of the farmhouse. He visited the local library and spoke with the few villagers who were willing to talk. The villagers were initially hesitant, but eventually shared fragmented stories about the farmhouse and its previous owner, Jonathan Blackwood. Jonathan Blackwood had been a reclusive scholar who dabbled in forbidden rituals and occult practices. The villagers spoke of strange occurrences and unexplained phenomena surrounding the house during Jonathan's time. Rumors of dark ceremonies and mysterious disappearances were whispered with a mix of fear and reverence. Jack found old journals and records that detailed Jonathan's obsession with the supernatural. The records revealed that Jonathan had conducted rituals aimed at communicating with and controlling the spirits of the dead. However, his experiments had gone horribly wrong, awakening restless spirits and trapping them in a shadowy existence between life and death. As Jack delved deeper into the history, he discovered that the shadowy figures haunting his home were the tormented souls of those who had perished during a mysterious event in the town's past. The spirits were bound to the farmhouse, their anguish feeding on the living. Jonathan's failed ritual had created a veil between the worlds, allowing the shadows to creep through the darkened halls. The more Jack uncovered, the more the hauntings intensified. The shadows grew bolder, their movements more aggressive. Jack found himself tormented by whispers and fleeting glimpses of ghostly figures. He felt trapped in a nightmare that seemed to have no end. Desperate to end the terror, Jack sought help from the villagers. A reclusive old woman named Agnes, known for her knowledge of local folklore, agreed to assist him. Agnes revealed that the only way to banish the spirits was to complete Jonathan Blackwood's unfinished ritual, one that would involve confronting Jonathan's ghost and breaking the veil between the worlds. Jack and Agnes ventured into the darkened depths of the farmhouse, where the presence of the shadows was strongest. They prepared the ritual according to Jonathan's journals, using ancient incantations and symbols. As they worked, the shadows grew more agitated, their forms writhing and flickering with malevolent intent. Jonathan Blackwood's ghost emerged from the darkness, a spectral figure with hollow eyes and a twisted expression. The spirit's presence was overwhelming, its aura of malevolence palpable. Jonathan's ghost sought to complete his ritual, feeding on the living to strengthen his own power. Jack faced the spirit with a mix of fear and determination. He recited the incantations from Jonathan's journals, his voice trembling but resolute. The ritual's power began to dispel the shadows, their forms dissolving into wisps of darkness. Jonathan's ghost let out a chilling wail, his form flickering as the veil between the worlds began to tear. The confrontation reached a climax as Jonathan's ghost lunged at Jack, its malevolent force pushing against the ritual's power. Jack, fueled by sheer will and the hope of liberation, continued the incantation with renewed intensity. The light from the ritual grew brighter, pushing back the shadows and forcing Jonathan's ghost to retreat. With a final, anguished cry, Jonathan's spirit was pulled into the void and the shadows dissipated. The oppressive atmosphere lifted, and the farmhouse seemed to sigh with relief. The veil between the worlds had been torn, and the restless souls were finally freed. With the curse lifted, Jack found a renewed sense of peace. The farmhouse, once a place of dread, now stood as a symbol of resilience and liberation. The shadows were gone, and the oppressive darkness had been replaced by a sense of tranquility. Jack continued his artistic pursuits in the farmhouse, finding inspiration in the peaceful surroundings. The village of Stonefield Hollow, too, seemed to emerge from its long nightmare, its residents cautiously optimistic about the future. As he looked out over the mist-covered hills, Jack felt a deep sense of accomplishment. The haunting veil had been lifted, and the shadows that once haunted his home had been banished. The past had been confronted, and the future now seemed full of promise. Thank you for braving the shadows with us tonight. As we've seen, the darkness holds many secrets, and not all are meant to be uncovered. Images of the shadowy figures and eerie farmhouse flash briefly. If you enjoyed this journey into the unknown, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe for more spine-chilling stories. And remember, sometimes the shadows are more than just tricks of the light. They're the remnants of something far more sinister. The screen fades to black with a flickering candle illuminating the channel's logo. Until next time, keep your lights on and your doors locked. The night is far from over.